In medieval Europe, beauty began with the color of the skin. The whiter the face, the closer a woman seemed to nobility. Sunlight meant labor, and labor meant poverty, so pale skin became a sign of privilege. To keep that look, women began using mixtures made from lead and vinegar. At first it was a trick of the upper class, a way to hide age and scars, but soon it spread everywhere. The recipe was simple and deadly. Ground lead was mixed with water or wine, turned into paste, and smeared across the face until the skin looked smooth and bright. The smell was sharp and sour, but people called it the scent of elegance. The effect seemed miraculous. The powder covered every flaw, made the face glow in candlelight, and gave the illusion of youth. But it also soaked through the skin. Lead entered the blood, destroyed the nerves, darkened the gums, and slowly poisoned the body. Women complained of weakness, headaches, shaking hands, and teeth that fell out, yet they kept painting themselves. Some even slept without washing it off, afraid that removing the paste would make them look ordinary again. Doctors warned that the mixture was toxic, but beauty was stronger than reason. Husbands noticed their wives growing pale and sickly but believed it was the price of refinement. Servants handling the powder fell ill too, their hands trembling from constant exposure. Still, no one stopped. The mirror had become more powerful than medicine. By the 15th century, white faces filled every royal court. Queens and courtesans competed for who could look the palest. Even when the skin cracked or bled, they brushed on more powder. When the flesh under their eyes turned gray, they said it was elegance. The smell of vinegar and rot clung to their hair, but no one dared to call it what it was. Servants prepared the paste each morning, grinding lead into bowls, mixing it with vinegar, and testing its texture on their own wrists before spreading it over skin that could no longer heal. The more it burned, the better it was believed to work. A woman who felt pain during the ritual smiled through it. It meant she was achieving perfection. The process took hours, and the result lasted only a day, yet no one questioned it. The sight of a white face had become more valuable than the person behind it. As the fashion grew, markets began selling cheap versions to everyone who could pay. The poison that once belonged to queens reached towns and villages. Women covered their wounds with more layers of paint, hiding the sores under white crusts. Some wore veils to protect the delicate mask from cracking in the sun. Others slept sitting upright so the mixture wouldn't smear on the pillow. They died slowly, not knowing why, and those who survived were left disfigured. The worst cases were quietly hidden from public view, faces eaten away by infection, teeth rotted black, eyes swollen shut. Yet even then, the idea of pale beauty remained untouched. Mothers still taught their daughters that a clean white face could change their life. It lasted for centuries. Portraits from that time show smooth faces that look calm and perfect, but behind each one there was pain. The same white surface that people admired was the same one that killed them. They called it beauty. It was simply poison with a pleasant color, and Europe worshipped it until death itself became fashionable. By the 19th century, beauty had shifted from the face to the body. Pale skin was no longer enough. The new obsession was the waist. The thinner it was, the higher the woman's value seemed to be. Society praised control over the body, and nothing showed that control better than a corset. Made from fabric reinforced with whalebone or steel, it squeezed the torso until the shape fit the fashion. To wear one was to announce discipline and self-restraint. To remove it was to risk judgment and shame. Girls began wearing corsets as children. Their mothers helped lace them every morning, pulling the strings tighter each year so the body would learn its limits. At first it was uncomfortable, then it became painful, and eventually it became normal. They learned to sit straight, breathe shallowly, and never bend at the waist. The first fainting spells were treated like a rite of passage. A woman who collapsed gracefully was considered delicate. Her weakness made her attractive. The men around her called it femininity, the women called it dignity. Inside their bodies, however, the organs were being rearranged. The stomach was pushed downward, the liver shifted, and the lungs lost their capacity to fill. The ribs bent inward over time, changing the skeleton itself. fashion magazines fueled the obsession. They printed diagrams of the perfect silhouette, teaching readers how to reduce their waists inch by inch. Manufacturers competed to design tighter and stronger models, adding metal clamps, levers, and hinges that could compress the torso mechanically. A waist smaller than 16 inches was considered ideal, though few could breathe properly at that size. Some women starved themselves to make lacing easier. Others wore their corsets to bed, believing that pain during sleep meant progress. Servants tightened the strings until their hands bled. In the most extreme cases, the pressure caused the ribs to snap. There were reports of women who died suddenly when the steel supports broke and punctured their lungs. Still, no one abandoned the ritual. The corset industry became one of the most profitable businesses of the century. Factory owners produced millions of garments, selling them to every social class. The wealthy bought custom-made silk corsets, while the poor settled for cheap cotton versions that still cut just as deep. Advertisements claimed that a small waist meant success in marriage and respect in public. To appear natural was no longer desirable. A proper lady was supposed to look constructed. Even pregnant women were advised to keep lacing, told that control over the body was proof of moral strength. Doctors eventually began speaking out. They linked corsets to miscarriages, breathing disorders, and permanent deformities. Some even displayed the skeletons of former corset wearers at medical lectures to show the damage. But their warnings were dismissed as exaggerations. Women defended the fashion as a matter of personal pride, and men encouraged it because it pleased the eye. The idea of beauty had become stronger than survival. By the end of the century, a few reform movements appeared, calling for rational dress and looser clothing, but change came slowly. Entire generations had already grown up shaped by steel and fabric. Even when corsets began to fade in the early 20th century, the scars remained, ribs curved inward, muscles atrophied, spines unnaturally bent. The body had been trained to depend on restriction. The garment itself vanished, but the idea stayed. The perfect waist became a number women continued to chase long after the strings were gone. The corset was never just fashion. It was a silent contract between pain and admiration, proof that beauty had become a language of suffering. It turned breathing into a privilege and control into virtue. The tighter the laces, the closer a woman came to society's idea of perfection, a body that looked fragile, and a will that refused to break. In China, beauty followed its own path, but the pattern was the same. Pain became the price of admiration. For nearly 1,000 years, women were judged by the size of their feet. The custom was called foot binding, and it began in the 10th century among the courtesans of the imperial court. One emperor compared a dancer's tiny, swaying steps to the movement of lotus petals, and from that image came the term the golden lotus foot. The idea spread through the nobility, then to the cities, and eventually into the countryside, until almost every household believed that a woman with natural feet could never be truly beautiful. The process began when a girl was 5 or 6 years old, before her bones had hardened. Her mother would soak her feet in a basin of warm water mixed with herbs and animal blood to soften the flesh. Then came the breaking. The toes were folded under the sole, the arch was bent upward until it snapped, and the whole foot was bound tightly with strips of cloth. The bandages had to be pulled tighter every few days to stop the bones from healing in their natural position. The pain was constant. The smell of infection filled the air. Many children screamed through the night, their feet bleeding through the bandages. Mothers told them to stay quiet and be brave. It was a test of strength and obedience. The goal was to make the foot no longer than 7 or 8 centimeters. When the bones stopped growing, the deformity became permanent. The toenails grew into the flesh, the toes died and rotted away, and sometimes they had to be cut off to keep the shape intact. Walking became slow and unstable, but this weakness was seen as charm. A woman who moved with short, trembling steps was described as graceful and modest. Men said her walk was like floating, soft and erotic. The truth was that every step drove broken bones against the skin. Over time, foot binding became not just fashion but social law. A girl with unbound feet could not marry into a good family. Even poor farmers' wives were forced to follow the practice to improve their children's chances in life. Families that refused were shamed. Mothers passed the ritual to their daughters, convincing themselves it was love. The tighter the wrapping, the higher the hope for a better future. In some households, mothers prayed before the ceremony, asking the ancestors for strength to hurt their child in the right way. By the Qing dynasty, the practice had spread across almost all of China. Shoemakers crafted tiny embroidered slippers, often no longer than a man's hand. They were considered objects of beauty and desire. Men collected them as tokens of affection, never acknowledging what hid beneath the silk: bones fused together, skin blackened with decay, pus seeping through the cloth. The ideal of the lotus foot had become a fetish that mixed beauty, control, and cruelty. When foreign travelers arrived in the 19th century, they described the custom with horror, but inside China it was still treated as a mark of pride. Some women even hid their bound feet when photographed, afraid that outsiders might not understand their sacrifice. When reformers of the early 20th century began to call the practice barbaric, it was already part of the nation's identity. Millions of women had lived and died without ever walking freely. Even after the official ban, foot binding continued in secret for decades. In remote villages, mothers still wrapped their daughters' feet, whispering that unbound feet were ugly and shameful. The last generation of women with bound feet lived into the 21st century, their steps small and painful, their bodies carrying the memory of 1,000 years of mutilation. The golden lotus became both a symbol of beauty and a monument to submission. It showed how easily a society could confuse suffering with virtue, and how pain, once normalized, can outlast the very empires that created it. When the old customs of pain began to fade, the obsession with beauty didn't die, it simply changed its shape. By the 19th century, ritual gave way to science, and vanity put on a white coat. People no longer broke bones or wrapped flesh with cloth. Instead, they swallowed chemicals, inhaled vapors, and rubbed poisons into their skin. The age of progress had arrived, and the same societies that once worshipped deformity now trusted medicine to deliver perfection. The most fashionable poison of that era was arsenic. Pharmacists sold it as a tonic, claiming that small doses purified the blood and brightened the complexion. Women bought it in pills, wafers, and even candies. They were told to start slowly, to build tolerance, and many did. At first it seemed to work. Their faces turned pale, their eyes appeared clear and shining, and their hair took on a faint golden tint. But after a few months the symptoms began: trembling hands, stomach cramps, a strange metallic taste, and fatigue that never left. When their skin began to flake and their voices weakened, doctors called it nervous exhaustion. In reality, it was arsenic poisoning. Yet many refused to stop. They believed the discomfort meant the treatment was working. Mercury followed close behind. It appeared in skin creams, spot removers, and hair dyes, sold in elegant jars with golden lettering. It erased freckles and dark spots quickly, giving the illusion of youth. But it also burned through the skin, entered the bloodstream, and settled in the brain. Women began to lose their teeth, suffer from mood swings, and forget entire days. Still, they kept buying the creams, convinced that beauty demanded endurance. Even physicians were fooled. Some prescribed mercury ointments themselves, calling them scientific rejuvenation. The vanity table of the 19th century looked more like a laboratory than a place of grooming. There were bottles of ammonia for whitening hands, lead-based powders for the face, and hair restorers made of sulfur and brandy. Perfume was used to cover the chemical stench. Many women wore gloves at night filled with mercury cream, hoping to wake up with skin like porcelain. The next morning, their hands shook and their nails turned black, but they saw only the smoothness they had gained. The pattern was always the same: pain disguised as progress. As the beauty market expanded, companies began using industrial chemicals without regulation. Adverts promised scientific beauty, and factories mass-produced poisons in glass bottles labeled with words like miracle, radiance, and purity. Poorer women bought cheaper versions made from household substances, bleach, lye, or diluted acid. Some mixed their own recipes from newspapers, unaware that they were slowly destroying their flesh. The concept of natural beauty disappeared. Artificial improvement became a duty. Doctors eventually recognized the epidemic. Hospitals filled with women suffering from organ failure, vision loss, and neurological collapse. Newspapers published warnings, but most readers ignored them. Society had fallen in love with the look of sickness. Pale faces and fragile bodies were seen as romantic, signs of sensitivity and refinement. Weakness had become fashionable again, only this time it wore the mask of modernity. By the end of the century, the beauty industry was unstoppable. It had turned self-destruction into commerce. Poisons once confined to apothecaries were now sold openly under royal patents. Women applied them daily without fear, trusting the advertisements that called it progress. The result was the same as it had been for centuries: pain, decay, and the desperate belief that suffering could make someone worthy of love. The poisons of vanity became symbols of a new age. They proved that even in a world guided by science, the human desire to be admired could still blind reason. The methods changed, the packaging improved, but the essence remained identical. Beauty was simply another name for control, and control always demanded a body to destroy. The 20th century changed everything except the idea itself. Technology replaced alchemy, medicine replaced superstition, but beauty remained chained to the same belief that pain could make a person perfect. When lead, mercury, and arsenic vanished from dressing tables, scalpels and injections took their place. The obsession didn't fade, it evolved. In the early decades, cinema and photography built the new image of femininity. Pale faces and narrow bodies filled magazines and posters. Actresses became templates, and women compared themselves to screens that never aged. Beauty salons turned into clinics where electricity, steam, and chemicals promised to erase flaws. Machines replaced powders. Electric rollers tightened skin, current shocks stimulated youth, and radiation lamps promised to heal acne while quietly burning flesh. Every new invention came with pain, and every slogan repeated the same message: suffering is progress. Then came surgery. By the mid-20th century, cosmetic operations became routine. Noses were cut down, eyelids lifted, chins carved into new shapes. Scars were hidden beneath powder, stitches under hair. Newspapers printed before and after photos like proof of miracles. In hospitals, women lay silent under bandages, unable to speak or eat, their faces swollen and bruised. Recovery took weeks, sometimes months, but when the swelling faded, society applauded the transformation. A good operation was one that erased all trace of the original self. By the 1960s, fashion made starvation elegant again. Thinness became a moral ideal: the smaller the body, the stronger the will. Magazines glorified diets of black coffee, cigarettes, and air. Designers hired models who looked close to collapse, and audiences called them beautiful. Doctors named the sickness anorexia, but it was rewarded as discipline. The corset was gone, yet the invisible strings around the waist only grew tighter. Generations of women learned that hunger was virtue. Men eventually joined them. Pain had finally become genderless. The late 20th century introduced chemicals once more, only now injected instead of swallowed. Botox paralyzed muscles, silicone filled lips and hips, fillers erased lines. Faces froze into identical expressions, smooth and lifeless, perfectly controlled. Clinics spread across every city, offering beauty on credit and perfection in installments. Advertisements showed happy clients, never the infections, rejections, or deaths that followed. The industry earned billions while pretending to heal insecurity it helped create. Then the digital age finished what the scalpels began. The mirror moved to the screen. Filters, retouching apps, and beauty algorithms replaced real faces with artificial ones. Photos became cleaner, smoother, thinner. People erased pores, reshaped noses, enlarged eyes, and whitened skin in seconds. The new perfection didn't need pain, it demanded obsession. Women and men spent hours comparing themselves to filtered versions of reality. Anxiety, eating disorders, and depression became the modern scars. The body no longer had to bleed, the mind did it instead. In the 21st century, the cycle completed itself. Every generation believed it had overcome the cruelty of the past, yet every mirror told the same story. Whether through lead, steel, or pixels, the result never changed. Beauty demanded submission. Pain proved devotion. What began as powder and vinegar ended in silicone and code, but the principle remained identical: to destroy the natural self in pursuit of an impossible image. The pursuit of beauty has always been humanity's quietest form of violence. The poisons, the corsets, the bindings, the scalpels, all were just tools for the same desire to be seen and accepted. Each era called it differently: refinement, elegance, progress. But behind every version stood the same truth: people would rather suffer beautifully than live imperfectly.